I found out my dad drained the college fund he'd promised me since childhood to pay for my stepbrother's rehab program, while I was filling out financial aid forms believing my future was already secure. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought the website had glitched. Like maybe I typed the account number wrong, or the system logged me into the wrong profile, or something normal and fixable had happened. Because the alternative, that the money was actually gone, didn't fit into the version of reality I'd been living in my entire life. My name is Madison Clark. I'm 17, a senior at Westbrook High in Des Moines, Iowa, and until recently, I thought my biggest stress was deciding which college acceptance to celebrate, not wondering if I could afford to attend any of them at all. My parents divorced when I was 8. Not dramatic, just quiet and sad, like two people slowly realizing they weren't meant to share the same life anymore. My mom moved to Tampa within a year, chasing sunshine and a fresh start with someone new. I stayed with my dad because everything familiar was here, my school, my friends, my room, the creaky stairs that always made noise at night. For a while it was just us. Frozen dinners, mismatched laundry piles, and a lot of quiet evenings where the house felt bigger than it used to. Then he met Laura, and suddenly the quiet was replaced by someone else's routines, someone else's voice, someone else's kid. Laura moved in first. Her boxes showed up before she did, stacked in the living room like physical proof that things were changing whether I was ready or not. She smelled like floral hand lotion and spoke in this careful, overly cheerful tone people use when they're trying not to scare a nervous animal. Her son Dylan followed a few weeks later. He was 12, loud in a way that didn't seem intentional, like he just didn't realize how much space he took up. He dropped his backpack in the hallway, turned the TV volume too high, laughed too hard at things that weren't that funny. Not mean, just a lot. We weren't enemies, but we weren't friends either. We were two kids forced into proximity, circling each other carefully, unsure what the rules were now. Dad kept saying we'd adjust, like that was something you could schedule on a calendar. Money never seemed tight in our house, but we weren't rich either. My dad worked as an insurance claims adjuster, long hours, steady paycheck, the kind of job that paid the bills but didn't leave room for extravagance. Laura managed a childcare center, which meant she was always tired and always talking about other people's kids. Despite that, one thing was constant. Dad always told me not to worry about college. Ever. Your education is covered, he'd say whenever the topic came up. Casual. Certain. Like gravity. He didn't just mention it once or twice. It was a background promise woven through my entire childhood. Good report card? Keep that up and you'll have your pick of schools. Birthday dinner? Another year closer to college. Random Tuesday conversation? Don't stress about tuition, I've got something set aside. He called it your college fund, so often it stopped sounding like money and started sounding like part of my identity. Other kids worried about scholarships and student loans. I worried about dorm layouts and whether I wanted to live in a city or somewhere quieter. Dylan didn't get those speeches. Not that I noticed anyway. He struggled in school, bounced between friend groups, got into minor trouble that never seemed serious enough to panic over but never really stopped either. Late homework, detentions, getting caught skipping class. Laura would sigh a lot. Dad would say things like, he just needs time. By sophomore year, Dylan had already switched friend circles twice and failed algebra once. Meanwhile, I was stacking AP classes like some kind of academic survival strategy. Teachers liked me. Guidance counselors knew my name. I stayed out of trouble mostly because trouble felt exhausting. Looking back, I think my dad trusted that I would land on my feet no matter what. At the time, it felt like confidence. Now it feels more like assumption. Senior year arrived faster than I expected. One minute I was worrying about driver's ed, the next I was filling out college applications at midnight with caffeine and anxiety keeping me awake. Acceptance letters started coming in late winter. Thick envelopes, congratulatory emails, the kind of messages that make everything feel suddenly real. I got into several good schools, including one in Illinois that I'd secretly hoped for but never fully believed would say yes. When I showed Dad the letter, he hugged me so hard my glasses pressed into my face. I'm proud of you, he said, voice thick in a way that made my chest ache. Laura smiled, a little too brightly. Dylan muttered, congrats, without looking up from his phone. That should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it's the moment I now replay in my head, wondering if Dad already knew then that he couldn't actually send me there. Because right after that, things started getting strange. Whenever I brought up costs, Dad changed the subject. When I asked about visiting campuses, Laura suddenly remembered errands she had to run. Dylan would just leave the room entirely, like the conversation physically repelled him. I told myself they were stressed, or tired, or overwhelmed. I did not consider that they were hiding something. The first rail crack appeared during a phone call I wasn't meant to overhear. I came downstairs late one night for water and heard Laura in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice that didn't sound like her usual tone at all. She doesn't know yet, she said. And I don't think this is the right time to tell her. I froze halfway down the stairs. Every instinct told me she was talking about me. There was a pause, then she added quietly, we can't upset her before graduation. My stomach dropped so fast it actually hurt. I crept back upstairs before she could see me, heart pounding in my ears, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. It could have been anything. School plans. Family drama. Something unrelated entirely. Except deep down, I already knew. The next morning, everyone acted normal. Too normal. Cheerful in that brittle way people get when they're pretending nothing is wrong. Dad asked about my homework. Laura made pancakes on a weekday, which she never did. Dylan barely spoke at all. I spent the whole day at school unable to focus, replaying those words over and over. She doesn't know yet. By the time I got home, the anxiety had hardened into something sharper. Not panic anymore. Suspicion. That night, I decided I wasn't waiting to be told. I waited until after dinner, when the dishes were done and the TV was murmuring in the living room, the way it always did in the evenings, like background noise for a life nobody was fully paying attention to. Dad was at the table scrolling through his phone. Laura was wiping the counter even though it was already clean. Dylan had retreated upstairs, which was normal for him lately. My hands were shaking, so I sat on them. "Can I ask you something?" I said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Dad looked up immediately. Of course. It would have been easier if he'd looked guilty. Instead, he just looked tired. Is there still money for college? The silence that followed didn't feel normal. It felt heavy, like the air had thickened. Laura stopped moving. Dad didn't answer. And right there, before anyone said a word, I knew. Laura stepped in first, voice overly gentle. "Madison, you're such a smart girl. There are so many scholarships available and student loans aren't as scary as people make them sound." It wasn't an answer. It was a deflection wrapped in encouragement. "Dad," I said, louder this time. He stared at the table for a long moment, then rubbed his face with both hands like he was trying to wake himself up. "We used some of it," he said quietly. "Some of it." My brain clung to those words like a life raft. "How much is some?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Most of it." My ears started ringing, the kind of high, hollow sound that makes everything else feel far away. "Most? Why?" I managed. Laura's eyes filled with tears almost instantly, which somehow made everything worse. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Before either of them could speak, footsteps thudded on the stairs. Dylan appeared in the doorway, looking confused until he saw my face. Then he looked like he wanted to disappear. And suddenly the pieces snapped together so fast it almost made me dizzy. "This is about Dylan," I said. Nobody corrected me. Last year, Dylan had gone through what everyone called a rough period. That was the official phrase. In reality, he started failing classes, staying out late, hanging around people who always seemed one step away from trouble. He got caught shoplifting with friends at a mall, not serious enough to ruin his life, but serious enough to scare everyone. After that, things escalated. Suspensions. Counseling. Long, tense conversations behind closed doors. Then one day he just left. I was told he'd gotten into a special residential program. Something structured, supportive, designed to help him reset before adulthood. It sounded expensive, but nobody mentioned money. They framed it like an opportunity, not a crisis. I didn't question it. Now I realized exactly where the funding had come from. It was an emergency, Dad said quickly, like he'd been holding the words in. He was spiraling. We couldn't just watch him throw his life away. Laura nodded, tears sliding down her face. That program saved him. I looked at Dylan. He couldn't meet my eyes. "How much did it cost?" I asked. Dad hesitated. "More than we expected." "Did he have a college fund?" I pressed. Laura shook her head slowly. "We tried to save, but things were different before I remarried." "Different?" "Meaning there wasn't one." "So you used mine," I said. Dad flinched like I'd hit him. "It wasn't a decision we made lightly," he said. "We believed you would be okay. You're strong. Responsible. You have options." That word, options, felt like a slap. "So my future was the backup plan?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't about choosing between you. It was about saving him." Saving him. From what? From consequences? From himself? From becoming someone inconvenient? Dylan finally spoke, voice low and strained. "I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know where the money came from. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But belief didn't change the reality sitting in my chest like a stone." "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Dad leaned forward, hands clasped like he was trying to hold the situation together physically. "We'll help as much as we can," he said. "There are payment plans. Loans. You can start at community college and transfer later. Plenty of students do that." Every suggestion sounded like a smaller version of the life I'd been planning. Laura reached for my hand. I pulled it back before she could touch me. Dylan muttered, "I'm sorry," barely audible. The thing is, he did look different. Calmer. Quieter. Like the program had sanded down his rough edges. 6 months earlier, he would have argued, shouted, slammed doors. Now he just stood there absorbing the tension like he believed he deserved it. And maybe he did. But I didn't deserve this either. "I need to think," I said finally. No one tried to stop me when I walked upstairs. My room felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone who still believed in a future that no longer existed. I sat on my bed staring at acceptance letters taped to the wall, each one suddenly meaningless. Dream schools, dorm plans, independence. All of it had depended on something I never realized could disappear. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the conversation, searching for a version where it turned out differently. By morning, the shock had hardened into something else, not anger exactly, not sadness either. More like a cold clarity. They hadn't accidentally lost the money. They had chosen to spend it. At breakfast, Dad acted like nothing had happened, asking if I wanted eggs, commenting on the weather. Laura hovered anxiously, watching me like I might shatter. Dylan didn't come downstairs at all. I picked at a piece of toast until it went dry. We should talk about next steps, Dad said carefully. Next steps. Like this was a project timeline, not my life. I'll figure it out, I said. And for the first time, I meant it without including them in the plan. Because whatever happened next, I couldn't rely on promises anymore. Not the comforting ones, not the lifelong ones, not even the ones made by someone who loved me. Especially those. The house changed after that conversation, like someone had quietly adjusted the temperature and nobody could get comfortable anymore. Dad started sending me scholarship links almost daily, forwarding emails with subject lines like important opportunity or deadline approaching, as if urgency could replace what had been lost. Laura cooked my favorite meals 3 nights in a row, hovering nearby but not quite sitting down, like she was waiting for forgiveness she didn't know how to ask for. Dylan mostly stayed in his room. We passed each other in hallways without speaking, both pretending not to notice the tension that followed us like static. Once I heard him pacing late at night, footsteps back and forth across the floor above my bedroom, restless and uneven. At school, everything felt surreal. My friends were comparing housing options and roommate preferences, talking about meal plans and campus tours. I nodded along, smiling at the right moments, but it felt like listening to a conversation from behind glass. My guidance counselor, Mr. Mercer, called me in after noticing I hadn't submitted my financial commitment forms yet. Still deciding, he asked kindly. Something like that. He gave me a long look, the kind adults use when they suspect there's more going on but don't want to pry. You got into excellent schools, he said. Don't let fear make the decision for you. Fear wasn't the problem. Reality was. I finally called my mom that weekend. We weren't especially close, too many years of distance, too many holidays spent in separate houses, but she was still my mother. If anyone had a right to know, it was her. At first, she thought I was exaggerating. They wouldn't do that, she said immediately. Your father wouldn't jeopardize your future like that. They already did, I said quietly. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath that sounded almost like anger igniting. That money was for you, she said. Specifically for you. I know. You should come live with me, she said suddenly. We'll figure something out. You don't need to stay there if they're going to treat you like this. The offer should have felt comforting. Instead, it just made everything feel more complicated. Moving to Tampa meant leaving my school, my friends, the life I'd built here. It meant becoming the new kid senior year, explaining things I didn't want to explain, rebuilding everything from scratch. I don't want to start over, I admitted. Mom exhaled slowly. Then don't. But you don't have to forgive them, Madison. Forgiveness wasn't even on the table yet. I was still trying to figure out how to exist in the same house without feeling like a guest in my own life. A few days later, Dylan knocked on my bedroom door. Not a casual tap, a hesitant, almost apologetic knock, like he expected me not to answer. I considered pretending I wasn't there, but curiosity won. When I opened the door, he looked smaller than usual somehow. Shoulders rounded, hands shoved awkwardly into his hoodie pockets. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside without saying anything. He didn't sit, just hovered near the desk like he wasn't sure how long he'd be allowed to stay. I really didn't know about the money, he said quickly. Not until after I got back. I watched him carefully. He wasn't making eye contact, but he didn't look like he was lying either. The program, it helped, he continued. I was messing up bad. Worse than you probably realized. I didn't respond. Part of me didn't want details. Details would make him human, and it was easier to be angry at an abstract problem than at a person standing in front of me. I'm working now, he added. At the hardware store on Maple. I'm saving. I'll pay you back someday. Someday. We were teenagers with part-time jobs. The number in question was more than either of us would see in years. That's not how this works, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. He swallowed hard. I know. The worst part was that I believed he felt guilty. If he'd been smug or dismissive, it would have been easier. Anger thrives on villains. But Dylan looked like someone carrying a weight he didn't know how to put down. I didn't want you to get hurt, he said quietly. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. You didn't want me to get hurt? I repeated. Your recovery literally cost me my future. He flinched, but didn't argue. My mom said you'll be okay, he said after a moment. You always are. There it was again. That same logic everyone kept using. You'll be okay. Like resilience was an excuse to sacrifice me. Being okay isn't the same as being fine, I said. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the carpet. I know. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile anymore, just heavy. When he finally left, he paused in the doorway like he wanted to say something else, then thought better of it. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Because understanding didn't make the situation better. It just made it more complicated. Dad tried to talk to me a few nights later. We were alone in the living room, the house unusually quiet. Laura had gone to bed early, and Dylan was out working his evening shift. I know you're angry, Dad said, sitting across from me with his hands clasped together. You have every right to be. That surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness, not acknowledgement. But we didn't choose him over you, he continued. We chose to save a child who was drowning. And I wasn't? I asked softly. He frowned. You weren't in danger. Maybe not the kind you could see. You had stability. Direction. A future. He didn't, Dad said. We believed you could handle setbacks. Setbacks. That word felt too small for what had happened. What if I can't? I asked. What if this changes everything? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Then we'll face that together. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But belief had started to feel dangerous. Spring kept moving forward whether I was ready or not. Deadlines came and went. Enrollment deposits. Housing forms. Orientation signups. Each email felt like a countdown clock I couldn't stop, ticking toward a decision I wasn't prepared to make. Eventually, I declined the out-of-state school I'd dreamed about since sophomore year. I couldn't justify the cost without the safety net I'd been promised. Clicking that button felt strangely quiet, no dramatic music, no visible consequences, just a small confirmation message and the dull sense that something important had closed behind me. I accepted a spot at a state university an hour away instead. Close enough to commute if I needed to. Cheap enough to survive on loans and part-time work. Sensible. Everyone told me it was a smart choice. Smart didn't feel the same as happy. Dad tried to act relieved, like this outcome had been the plan all along. Laura hugged me too tightly, whispering that everything would work out. Dylan said nothing, but he nodded when I told him, his expression a mix of guilt and something like gratitude. Life rearranged itself around the new reality. Graduation day arrived bright and windy, the kind of perfect spring weather that makes everything look like a postcard version of itself. I walked across the stage, accepted my diploma, smiled for photos. From the stands, Dad cheered loudly, Laura waved both hands, and Dylan clapped with a seriousness that felt almost solemn. For a few hours, everything looked normal. After the ceremony, people gathered on the lawn, hugging, crying, taking pictures in clusters that would scatter across the country within months. My friends talked excitedly about dorm move-in dates and road trips and independence. I listened, nodded, laughed at the right moments. Inside, it felt like I was watching someone else's life play out. Mom flew in from Florida and made it very clear she still thought I should have moved in with her. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, then pulled back and searched my face like she was trying to assess damage. You don't have to pretend you're okay, she said quietly. I'm not pretending, I said. I just don't know what I am yet. That seemed to satisfy her, or at least stop the conversation. Summer settled into a strange routine. I got a job at a local coffee shop, saving every dollar I could. Dad started transferring small amounts into my account when he was able, not enough to replace what was lost, but enough to show he was trying. Laura became overly considerate, asking permission before making plans, before borrowing things, before even entering my room. Dylan worked long shifts at the hardware store. Sometimes we crossed paths in the kitchen late at night, both too tired to pretend anything. Those quiet moments were oddly peaceful, no accusations, no apologies, just two people sharing space without expectations. One night he said, I really am going to pay you back. I shrugged. Focus on staying okay first. He looked surprised, like he hadn't expected kindness. I don't hate you, I added, because it felt important to say out loud. His shoulders relaxed slightly, some invisible tension easing. Thanks, he said. I don't hate you either. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't war anymore. Move-in day at the university was anticlimactic compared to the dramatic version I'd imagined for years. No long road trip, no emotional goodbye outside a dorm hundreds of miles away. Just a short drive, a small dorm room, and the knowledge that I could be home in under 90 minutes if something went wrong. Dad carried boxes up the stairs in silence. Laura fussed over bedding. Dylan assembled a cheap desk with intense concentration, like it was a puzzle that mattered more than it should. When everything was done, we stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure how to say goodbye without reopening wounds. Dad hugged me first. I'm proud of you, he said, voice rough. This time I believed him. Laura squeezed my hand, eyes shiny but not crying. Dylan gave me a quick, careful hug, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. Call if you need anything, he said. After they left, the room felt both empty and full at the same time, empty of people, full of possibility. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future again. Not the one I'd planned, but one I could still build. It's been a few months now. Classes are harder than I expected, but manageable. I work evenings at the campus bookstore. I've made a couple of friends who don't know the whole story, which is oddly freeing. To them, I'm just another freshman figuring things out. At home, things are calmer. Not fixed, not perfect, but quieter. Dad and I talk more honestly now. Laura has stopped trying so hard to make everything okay. Dylan started community college and seems determined to keep his life on track. Sometimes I still feel a sharp flash of resentment when I think about what could have been. Other times I realize that without this mess, I might never have learned how strong I actually am. I don't know if what my parents did was right or wrong. I don't know if there was ever a version of the story where nobody got hurt. All I know is that my future isn't gone, it just looks different than the one I imagined. And I'm still not sure whether accepting that makes me mature, or just someone who didn't have a choice. So I keep wondering, did they save one child or sacrifice the other?